Robert saw his billionaire boss topless at the beach. When she caught him staring, everything changed. He was just a janitor, invisible to everyone in the gleaming glass tower where he mopped floors after midnight. She was Stephanie Lewis, 33 years old, founder and CEO of Quantum Dynamics, one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country. Their worlds should never have collided, but fate had other plans, and it all started with one accidental, mortifying moment on a crowded beach. If this story grabs you, hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you never miss our next video. Trust me, you'll want to see where this goes. The first time Robert Phillips truly noticed his boss, he was emptying the executive floor trash at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday. Not that she knew he existed. To Stephanie Lewis, CEO and founder of Quantum Dynamics, the janitorial staff were invisible, necessary but unseen. Ghosts who kept the gleaming glass and steel headquarters pristine while everyone else slept. Robert was 40 years old, though some days he felt twice that. A single father to 7-year-old Emma, he worked the graveyard shift as a janitor at Quantum Dynamics, one of the most successful tech companies in Silicon Valley. The building itself was a marvel of modern architecture, all floor-to-ceiling windows and open-concept workspaces designed to inspire innovation. Robert just made sure the floors stayed shiny and the trash bins stayed empty. 5 years ago, his life had been completely different. Detective Robert Phillips, badge number 472, had been one of the best investigators in the San Francisco Police Department. He'd closed cases other detectives couldn't crack, had a 93% solve rate, and was being groomed for lieutenant. Then came the accident that shattered everything. His wife, Claire, had been driving home from her sister's house on a rainy November night. A drunk driver ran a red light. She died instantly. The drunk driver walked away with minor injuries and a suspended license. Robert, holding their 6-month-old daughter Emma, attended the funeral in a fog of grief so thick he couldn't see past the next minute, let alone the next day or year. The nightmares started a week later. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the accident report photos. The mangled car, the rainy intersection, the senselessness of it all. He tried to work through it, threw himself into cases, stayed late at the station, pushed harder than ever. But his focus was gone. He'd be interviewing a suspect and suddenly see Claire's face. He'd be reviewing evidence and lose track of hours, staring at nothing. His captain noticed. His partner noticed. Robert himself noticed, but couldn't stop the spiral. After he nearly compromised a major investigation by missing a critical piece of evidence, his captain sat him down and said the words Robert had been dreading. "Phil," Captain Rodriguez had said, using Robert's nickname, "you need help, professional help. Take a leave. Get yourself together. Your daughter needs you whole, not broken." Robert took the leave, but he never went back. He resigned 6 months later, unable to face the job that reminded him of everything he'd lost. He needed something simple, something that didn't require him to solve murders and catch criminals and see the worst of humanity, something that let him be there when Emma woke up from her own nightmares, calling for her mother. That's how Detective Robert Phillips became Robert the Janitor. The pay was a fraction of what he'd made on the force. The work was mindless, repetitive, and involved more chemicals than he cared to breathe. But it was honest work, and it kept food on the table. More importantly, it gave him the flexibility to be a father. He worked midnight to 8 in the morning, slept a few hours, picked Emma up from school, spent the afternoon and evening with her, and went back to work after she fell asleep. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was the life he had, and he was making it work. Stephanie Lewis, on the other hand, was living exactly the life she'd planned. Robert had seen her photo in the business magazines that littered the break room. usually accompanied by headlines like Silicon Valley's youngest billionaire or the woman disrupting tech infrastructure. She'd founded quantum dynamics at 28, straight out of a PhD program at Stanford, with a revolutionary software platform that optimized cloud computing for enterprise clients. Within 5 years, her company had gone from a garage startup to a billion-dollar empire. Everyone in the building worshipped her. The engineers hung on her every word during town halls. The executives competed for her approval. Even the janitorial supervisor, Carlos, who'd worked in corporate buildings for 30 years, admitted that Stephanie Lewis was different. Brilliant, driven, demanding, but fair. Robert just cleaned her office and tried not to leave fingerprints on the awards cluttering her shelves. On that particular Tuesday night, as Robert emptied Stephanie's executive wastebasket, something caught his eye. A document, partially shredded, with fragments of text visible. Most people would have tossed it in the trash bag and moved on, but Robert's detective instincts, dormant but never truly dead, kicked in automatically. He glanced at the fragments: corporate letterhead, financial figures, offshore accounts, wire transfers, fabricated invoices. The words jumped out at him, triggering pattern recognition he'd honed over a decade of investigative work. This wasn't normal corporate paperwork. This was evidence of something illegal, and someone had tried to destroy it in Stephanie Lewis's office. Robert's hands trembled slightly as he held the shredded pieces. He should have thrown them away, should have minded his own business, should have remembered that he wasn't Detective Phillips anymore, just Robert the janitor who needed to keep his head down and his job secure. But he couldn't. Once a detective, always a detective. He pulled out his phone and carefully photographed the shredded fragments, arranging them mentally, already piecing together the puzzle. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, shell companies with vague names, payments authorized with Stephanie Lewis's digital signature, except the IP addresses originated from different terminals. Someone was embezzling millions from quantum dynamics, and someone was setting Stephanie Lewis up to take the fall. Robert deleted the photos, then immediately stopped himself. He couldn't delete evidence, even if it wasn't his case, even if he was just a janitor with no authority and no business getting involved. He encrypted the photos, buried them in a folder labeled Emma School Photos, and tried to forget about them. But he couldn't forget. For the next 3 weeks, every time he cleaned Stephanie's office, he looked for more evidence. He found it. More shredded documents, emails printed and torn, USB drives carelessly tossed in the trash. Whoever was framing Stephanie Lewis was either incredibly arrogant or incredibly stupid. Robert suspected the former. He started a file. Not officially, just notes on his phone. Patterns, timelines, digital signatures that didn't match up. Wire transfers processed when Stephanie was verifiably in other cities, giving keynote speeches or attending board meetings. The more Robert dug, the more convinced he became that Stephanie Lewis had no idea she was being systematically destroyed from the inside. But what could he do? He was a janitor. If he approached her, she'd think he was crazy. Or worse, she'd think he was the one embezzling and trying to cover his tracks. He had no authority, no credibility, no reason for a billionaire CEO to listen to him. So he did nothing, just kept his head down, cleaned the offices, collected evidence he couldn't use, and tried to focus on being a good father to Emma. Then came the beach day. The company's annual beach day was mandatory for all employees, even the janitorial staff. Robert had tried to get out of it. Emma was at summer camp that week, a rare luxury he'd saved for months to afford, and he'd been looking forward to a quiet day off. Just him, a book, and maybe a few hours of sleep that wasn't interrupted by alarm clocks or Emma's early morning energy. But the company insisted. Team building, unity, everyone from the CEO to the janitors, all gathering at Stinson Beach for volleyball, barbecue, and mandatory fun. Robert received 3 separate emails reminding him that attendance was required and would be monitored. So he showed up, dressed in old swim trunks and a faded t-shirt from Emma's school fundraiser, feeling completely out of place. The beach was crowded with Quantum Dynamics employees. Engineers set up an elaborate volleyball tournament. Marketing staff claimed the best spots near the water. Executives huddled under a rented pavilion, probably discussing quarterly earnings even on their day off. And Robert stood near the snack table, eating a hot dog and trying to look like he belonged. That's when he saw her. Stephanie Lewis stood near the water's edge, and Robert almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the sharp business suit and severe pulled-back hair. Instead, she wore a white bikini top and denim shorts, her long dark hair loose and windswept, her feet bare in the sand. She was laughing with a group of senior managers, her whole demeanor relaxed in a way Robert had never witnessed during his late-night cleaning rounds. For the first time, she looked human, accessible, not the untouchable billionaire CEO, but just a woman enjoying a day at the beach. Robert found himself staring, not with lust or desire, but with genuine surprise. This was Stephanie Lewis, without the armor, without the corporate persona, just herself. She looked beautiful, not magazine cover beautiful, but real beautiful. Windswept and laughing and completely at ease. It struck Robert that this was probably the only place where Stephanie Lewis could let her guard down, away from the office, away from the board meetings and investor calls and constant pressure to perform. Here, she was just a person. Robert realized he'd been staring for too long and quickly looked away, back to his hot dog. But the image stayed with him, the real Stephanie Lewis, the one hidden behind the CEO mask. Then disaster struck. Robert didn't see it coming. He was focused on his food, trying to blend into the background like he always did. Then he heard shouting, laughter. A rogue wave surged up the beach, bigger than the others, catching everyone off guard. Stephanie, standing at the water's edge, turned too late. The wave hit her full force, knocking her backward into the sand. She stumbled, arms flailing, trying to regain her balance. And in that split second of chaos, her white bikini top shifted completely. Robert looked up at exactly the wrong moment. Their eyes met across the crowded beach. Stephanie, soaking wet, furious, mortified, clutching at her bikini top. Robert, frozen with a half-eaten hot dog, his face burning with embarrassment. For 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. They stared at each other. Then Stephanie grabbed a towel from a nearby chair, wrapped it around herself, and stormed off toward the parking lot. Robert wanted to die. Of all the people to witness that moment, it had to be him, the janitor, the invisible nobody who cleaned her office and had no business even being in her line of sight. He turned away immediately, his face burning, his heart pounding with second-hand embarrassment. He expected nothing. Maybe a complaint to HR, maybe termination. He'd witnessed the CEO in a mortifying moment, and there was no coming back from that. Robert finished his hot dog mechanically, trying to decide if he should leave now or wait a respectful amount of time. Then, 10 minutes later, Stephanie appeared in front of him, fully dressed now, in shorts and a Quantum Dynamics Company t-shirt, her hair still wet, her face unreadable. "You're Robert Phillips," she said. Not a question, a statement. Robert nodded, unable to form words. His throat felt like sandpaper. "You work nights, janitorial staff." "Yes, ma'am," he managed to croak. Her jaw tightened, and Robert braced himself for the termination speech. Instead, she said, "What you saw?" "I saw nothing, ma'am." Robert interrupted quickly. "I apologize. It was an accident. I didn't mean to stare. I'm sorry." She studied him for a long moment, her sharp green eyes calculating, assessing, measuring. Robert felt like he was being scanned by some advanced AI. Then, unexpectedly, she extended her hand. "Stephanie Lewis," she said, as if introducing herself for the first time. Robert shook her hand, confused. "I know who you are, Ma'am." "Stop calling me Ma'am. It makes me feel ancient." She crossed her arms, still studying him with that intense gaze. "You're the one who leaves the reports on my desk organized by priority, aren't you?" Robert blinked. I sometimes straighten things, part of the job, keeping workspaces tidy. No janitor straightens things by cross-referencing financial discrepancies and flagging potential audit risks with color-coded sticky notes." Her eyes narrowed. "I've been wondering for weeks who was leaving those annotations. My CFO denied it. My assistant had no idea. But someone's been analyzing my documents and leaving helpful notes. That's you, isn't it?" Robert's mind raced. He'd been caught, not for staring at her on the beach, but for doing something he shouldn't have been doing. Analyzing confidential documents, leaving notes about financial irregularities, acting like a detective when he was just a janitor. "I used to be a detective," he admitted quietly, figuring the truth was his only option now. "SFPD, but that was a long time ago." Stephanie's expression shifted. The anger drained away, replaced by interest. Sharp, calculating interest. "A detective? And now you work as a janitor?" "Single dad. I needed stability, predictable hours, something that let me be there for my daughter." She nodded slowly, as if filing that information away in some mental database. Then she surprised him for the third time that day. "Have lunch with me tomorrow, 1 o'clock, executive dining room. I have something I need to discuss." "Ma'am, Stephanie, I don't think that's appropriate. It's not optional, Mr. Phillips. Consider it an executive request." Her tone left no room for argument. 1 o'clock tomorrow. Don't be late." She walked away, leaving Robert standing there with his half-eaten hot dog, bewildered, terrified, and completely unsure what had just happened. The next day, Robert showed up at the executive dining room at exactly 12:55, giving himself 5 minutes to panic in the lobby. He was wearing his janitor uniform because he didn't own anything else remotely appropriate. Dark blue work pants, a Quantum Dynamics polo shirt with facilities embroidered on the chest, and his worn work boots. He felt absurdly out of place among the executives in their tailored suits. The hostess looked at him skeptically when he said he had a lunch appointment with Stephanie Lewis. But she checked her tablet, confirmed his name, and led him to a private table in the back corner of the dining room. Stephanie was already there, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit that probably cost more than Robert's monthly rent. She gestured for him to sit. "You notice the offshore accounts," she said without preamble, the moment Robert sat down. Robert froze, his hand halfway to the water glass. "I don't know what—" "Don't lie to me, Mr. Phillips. You took a photo of the shredded document in my office 3 weeks ago. I checked the security footage. You photographed 8 different documents over the past month. You've been investigating something." Robert's blood ran cold. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. I didn't mean to overstep, You did me a favor." Stephanie leaned forward, her voice low and intense, her eyes locked on his. "Someone in my company is embezzling millions of dollars and systematically framing me for it. The board is circling like sharks. The FBI started asking questions last week, and I have no idea who I can trust." Robert stared at her, his detective brain spinning into overdrive. "You're being framed?" "Yes." "And you want me to investigate?" "Yes." "Why me? You have security staff, you have lawyers, you have access to private investigators who all have conflicts of interest, who all might be compromised, who all might be the ones setting me up." Stephanie slid a folder across the table. You're the only person in this entire building who looked at those documents and didn't ask for money, leverage, or a promotion. You're a janitor with detective instincts, no corporate ambitions, and apparently a moral compass strong enough that you've been collecting evidence without telling anyone. Robert opened the folder. Inside were copies of the same documents he'd photographed, plus dozens more. Financial statements, wire transfer records, shell company registrations. It was a forensic accountant's nightmare and a detective's dream. "This is massive," Robert said quietly, flipping through the pages. "Millions in fraudulent transfers, falsified invoices, digital signature forgery. Whoever's doing this has high-level access and serious technical skills." "I know. That's why I need you, because I'm not sure who else I can trust. And because something tells me you're the only person in this building who still believes in justice more than profit." Robert looked up at her, seeing past the CEO mask for the second time. She was terrified, trying to hide it behind confidence and control, but terrified. Her company, her reputation, everything she'd built was being systematically destroyed, and she was drowning. "I can't," Robert said, even though every instinct in his body was screaming at him to say yes. "I'm not a detective anymore. I left that life behind. I have my daughter to think about, her stability, her school." "I can't—" "I'll triple your salary," Stephanie interrupted. "Effective immediately. Full benefits for Emma. Health, dental, vision. Private school tuition covered, whichever school you choose. And when this is over, if you want your detective career back, I'll make the calls. I know people. I can get you back on the force, if that's what you want." Robert's hands trembled slightly as he held the folder. Triple salary meant he could stop living paycheck to paycheck. Meant Emma could have the dance lessons she wanted, the summer camps, the opportunities he couldn't currently afford. Private school meant better education, better resources, better future. But it also meant diving back into the world he'd left behind. Investigations, late nights, the obsessive focus that had nearly destroyed him after Claire died. "If I do this," Robert said slowly, thinking about Emma, thinking about Stephanie, thinking about justice, "you give me full access. No restrictions, no areas off limits. And if I find something that implicates you, I report it. I don't care if you're paying me. I report the truth." Stephanie smiled for the first time since they'd sat down. It was sharp, approving, and almost predatory. "Deal. I wouldn't have it any other way." They shook hands across the table, and just like that, Robert Phillips was back in the game. The investigation started that very night. Robert resumed his janitorial shifts, but now with purpose beyond cleaning. He combed through executive offices, photographing documents, copying files from computers that executives left logged in, tracking email metadata. Stephanie provided him with master access codes, override passwords, and explicit permission to go anywhere, anytime. It felt like being a detective again. The late nights, the puzzle pieces, the satisfaction of watching patterns emerge from chaos. Except now, instead of a badge, he had a mop, and instead of a partner, he worked alone. The fewer people who knew what he was doing, the better. The pattern emerged within a week. Fake invoices from shell companies with vague names like Tech Solutions LLC and Global Services Partners. Payments authorized under Stephanie's digital signature, routed through offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, then laundered back through legitimate-looking consulting contracts. Someone with high-level access was systematically bleeding quantum dynamics dry, and they were doing it in a way that made Stephanie Lewis look like the mastermind. Robert narrowed the suspects to 3 people. Each had motive, each had access. Each had the technical skills to pull off sophisticated financial fraud. Marcus Brennan, Chief Financial Officer. 45 years old, Yale MBA, 20 years in corporate finance. Marcus had opposed Stephanie's aggressive expansion strategy, publicly arguing that the company was growing too fast. If Stephanie was removed and Marcus took over as acting CEO, he could steer the company toward his more conservative vision. Plus, Marcus would have direct access to financial systems and the authority to authorize transfers. Diane Harper, Vice President of Operations, 38 years old, Stanford graduate, former McKinsey consultant. Diane had been passed over for COO when Stephanie promoted someone else. The office gossip said Diane was furious, felt undervalued, and had started interviewing with competitors. Diane controlled vendor relationships and contract approvals, perfect cover for creating fake consulting agreements. And Cole Richardson, 34 years old, MIT computer science prodigy, and Stephanie's co-founder. Cole had started Quantum Dynamics with Stephanie in a garage 7 years ago. They'd been best friends, business partners, and according to office rumors, briefly more than that. But 6 months ago, Cole had wanted to sell Quantum Dynamics to a major conglomerate for $8 billion. Stephanie refused. She believed in the company's independence, its mission, its potential. Cole believed in cashing out while they could. They'd fought, publicly, at a board meeting, with executives and investors watching. Cole accused Stephanie of letting ego cloud her judgment. Stephanie accused Cole of selling out. The partnership fractured. Cole stayed on as CTO, but the friendship was over. Each suspect had motive, each had means, but only one had the technical skills to forge Stephanie's digital signature so flawlessly that even the company's own IT security couldn't detect it. Cole Richardson. Robert spent 2 weeks tracking Cole's digital footprint. Late-night server access. Commands executed from Cole's terminal. Payments processed during narrow windows when Stephanie was verifiably off-site, giving keynote speeches or attending board meetings in other cities. The embezzlement had started exactly 6 months ago, right after Stephanie refused to sell the company. It wasn't just about money, it was revenge. Cole was destroying Stephanie's reputation, tanking the company's stock value, and setting her up for federal prosecution. When Quantum Dynamics collapsed, Cole could sweep in, buy it back for pennies on the dollar, and rebuild it his way. It was brilliant, methodical, and absolutely provable. Robert compiled the evidence, encrypted it in multiple backups, and presented it to Stephanie in her office late one night. She read through the files, her expression hardening with each page. "Cole," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "My best friend, the person I trusted most in the world." "I'm sorry," Robert said, meaning it. He'd seen this kind of betrayal before. The people closest to you, the ones you trusted implicitly, were often the ones capable of causing the most damage. Stephanie looked up at him, and for a moment Robert saw raw pain in her eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by fierce determination. "Don't be sorry. You just saved my company, and probably my life. We still need to prove it in a way that will hold up in court. The evidence is solid, but Cole's smart. If we confront him directly, he'll have time to cover his tracks. We need him to make a mistake." "A trap?" "Yes." Stephanie nodded slowly, her strategic mind already working. "What do you suggest?" Over the next hour, they crafted a plan. Stephanie would call an emergency board meeting, announcing her intention to temporarily step down while the FBI investigation concluded. It was a calculated risk. The board would panic. Investors would dump stock. But if Cole believed he'd won, that Stephanie was beaten, he'd move the final tranche of stolen money and disappear. They scheduled the board meeting for the following Monday. Robert would monitor Cole's every digital move, tracking his access, watching for the transfer they knew was coming. For 3 days, nothing happened. Cole went to work, attended meetings, acted normally. Robert started to worry that maybe they'd tipped their hand somehow, that Cole had figured out someone was watching. Then, on Thursday night at 11:37 p.m., Cole accessed the quantum dynamics servers from his home computer. Robert, watching in real time from his monitoring station in the building's security office, saw the terminal light up. Cole was initiating a massive wire transfer. $15 million, the final piece of his embezzlement scheme, routing through 3 shell companies before landing in an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Robert picked up his phone and called an old friend. Detective Sarah Chen answered on the second ring, her voice sharp and alert despite the late hour. "Phil? That you?" "It's me, Sarah. I need a favor. A big one." "You disappeared for 5 years, and now you need a favor. This better be good. Corporate embezzlement, 15 million in wire fraud, happening right now. I have evidence, I have the suspect, and I have a real-time transfer in progress. Can you get a warrant?" Sarah was silent for 3 seconds. Then, "Give me the address. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Robert gave her Cole's home address, his terminal information, and a brief summary of the evidence. Sarah, who'd been his partner for 6 years before he resigned, trusted him implicitly. If Phil said he had evidence, he had evidence. Sarah arrived with a warrant and 2 patrol officers exactly 29 minutes later. They arrested Cole in his home office, the transfer still processing on his screen. The evidence was irrefutable. Cole didn't even try to deny it. He just smiled, looked directly at the officers and said, "It should have been my company." The stolen funds were frozen. The FBI took over the case. Cole was charged with wire fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, and a dozen other felonies. Stephanie's name was cleared completely. The board issued a public apology. The stock price rebounded. The media exploded with the story. Billionaire CEO framed by jealous co-founder. Genius detective turned janitor saves the day. Silicon Valley's biggest betrayal. For a week, Robert couldn't go anywhere without someone recognizing him from the news coverage. But for Robert, the aftermath was quieter and more personal. Stephanie offered him a permanent position as head of corporate security, with a salary that would fundamentally change his and Emma's lives. Health insurance that actually covered things. A retirement plan, stock options, the kind of job security he hadn't dreamed of in years. He accepted with one condition: normal hours, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, no more graveyard shifts. He wanted to be there when Emma woke up, when she went to school, when she came home. He'd sacrificed enough time with her already. Stephanie agreed without hesitation. But something else had shifted between them during the investigation. The professional boundaries they'd carefully maintained began to blur. It started small. Coffee meetings that ran long, turning into lunch. Strategy sessions where they ended up talking about their lives instead of corporate security protocols. Stephanie opened up about the loneliness of running a billion-dollar company, about being perpetually isolated at the top, about wondering if anyone saw her as a person instead of a CEO or a bank account. Robert shared his grief over Claire, his fears about raising Emma alone, his guilt over taking a job that felt like giving up on everything he'd worked for. They talked about expectations versus reality, about the gap between who they thought they'd be and who they actually were. One night, after a particularly grueling day of depositions and legal meetings related to Cole's prosecution, Stephanie showed up at Robert's modest apartment in the Sunset District with Thai takeout and an apology. "I'm sorry for dragging you into this," she said, standing awkwardly in his doorway, still in her business suit, holding bags of food like a peace offering. "You had a quiet life, and I turned it upside down." Robert smiled, stepping aside to let her in. "You gave me my life back. I was just surviving before, going through the motions. Now I'm actually living. I'd forgotten what that felt like. Stephanie set the food down on his small kitchen table, looking around at the modest apartment. 2 bedrooms, worn furniture, Emma's drawings covering the refrigerator. It was the opposite of her penthouse with its floor-to-ceiling windows and designer everything. "You saved me, Robert," she said quietly. "Not just the company. Me. I was drowning, and you threw me a lifeline." Emma appeared in the hallway, rubbing her eyes, wearing pajamas covered in cartoon unicorns. "Dad? Who's that?" Robert knelt beside his daughter, brushing her hair back. "Emma, this is Stephanie. She's my friend from work." "Stephanie, this is Emma, the most important person in my entire world." Stephanie crouched down to Emma's level, her usual intimidating CEO persona melting away completely. "Hi, Emma. I've heard so much about you. Your dad says you're the smartest kid in your whole school." Emma giggled, still half asleep. "He has to say that. He's my dad." "Well, I'm not your dad, and I believe him. He told me you got an A on your science project about volcanoes." Emma's eyes lit up. "You know about my volcano? It erupted with baking soda and vinegar and everything." "That sounds amazing. Can you show me pictures?" For the next hour, Robert watched in amazement as Stephanie Lewis, billionaire CEO who terrified boardrooms and commanded tech conferences, sat on his living room floor looking at Emma's school projects and genuinely enjoying herself. She asked questions. She laughed at Emma's jokes. She admired drawings and listened to long, rambling stories about second-grade drama. By the time Emma finally went back to bed, Stephanie's perfect CEO facade had completely crumbled. Her hair was messy. Her suit jacket was draped over Robert's couch. She was smiling in a way he'd never seen, open and unguarded and just happy. "You're really good with her," Robert said, handing Stephanie a beer from his mostly empty fridge. "I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't have kids. I've barely been around kids. But Emma's wonderful. You're doing an amazing job raising her. Most days I feel like I'm barely keeping it together. That's how I feel running a billion-dollar company. I think we're all just faking it and hoping no one notices." They talked until 2 in the morning, long after the Thai food was cold and forgotten, about their lives, their fears, their hopes, about the weird circumstances that had brought them together, about the mortifying beach incident that had started everything. "I was so angry that day," Stephanie admitted, laughing now at the memory. "Not just embarrassed, furious. I thought you were just another person seeing me as an object, as a curiosity." "I wasn't," Robert said quietly. "I was seeing you as a person for the first time, not the CEO, not the billionaire, just Stephanie, and I was caught off guard by how human you looked." "Human, not a particularly flattering description. It's the best compliment I can give. You looked real, vulnerable, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with magazine covers or corporate power." Stephanie turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in years." The moment stretched between them, loaded with possibilities. Robert felt the pull, the attraction that had been building for weeks. But he hesitated. She was still technically his boss. She was a billionaire. He was a janitor turned security director with a 7-year-old daughter and a studio apartment. "I should go," Stephanie said, but she didn't move. "You don't have to." "Robert, I know all the reasons this is complicated, but I don't care about complications anymore. Life's too short. I learned that the hard way." Stephanie's eyes softened. "That day at the beach, when you looked at me, I was so angry. But then I realized you weren't looking at me like I was some unattainable billionaire. You were looking at me like I was just a person. Do you know how rare that is? How desperate I am for someone to see me as just Stephanie." "I see you," Robert said simply. "Just you, and I like what I see." She kissed him. soft at first, tentative, asking a question. Robert answered, pulling her closer, 5 years of loneliness and grief melting away. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard, both smiling. "So," Stephanie said, a little breathless, "the janitor and the billionaire. Think we can make this work?" "I think we already are," Robert replied. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened. Stephanie started joining Robert and Emma for weekend outings. The zoo, where Emma insisted on seeing every single animal. The park, where they flew kites and ate ice cream. Movie nights in Robert's apartment, with Emma between them on the couch, arguing about which Disney movie was objectively the best. Stephanie was awkward at first, unsure how to navigate the world of single-parent domesticity. She'd never been around kids much, didn't know the rules of playground etiquette or how to negotiate bedtime routines, but Emma adored her, and Stephanie quickly learned. Robert watched them bond, his heart full in a way he hadn't felt since Claire died. Emma needed a mother figure, Stephanie needed family, and Robert needed both of them more than he'd realized. One evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Stephanie and Robert sat on his tiny apartment balcony, watching the sunset paint the San Francisco skyline in shades of orange and gold. "I never thought I'd have this," Stephanie said quietly, her head resting on Robert's shoulder. "A family. Someone who sees me as more than a CEO or a bank account. Someone who doesn't want anything from me except just